waiting to go live on a couple different platforms. It takes a little bit of time. So I hope you're all having a great day. It is cold in the Hudson Valley today. And it looks like it's going to be cold this weekend. And if any of you are here and you have weddings this weekend, I just hope that you have a great weekend ahead of you, wonderful weddings ahead of you. And that if you're in the Northeast, you bundle up because it's supposed to be cold. So I wanted to share with you all of the lessons that I've learned over the past year of being a full-time entrepreneur. And if you're not new here, you know that I have been a wedding photographer for over a decade, but I was not full-time in my business until last year. I left my 9 to 5 in February of 2022. And then I just kind of embarked on this journey of being a full-time entrepreneur. And there was a lot of preparation that went into this. But then what I wasn't prepared for was how it would actually change me as a person, how it would give me lessons to learn as a person. And there were 9 key lessons that I saw play out over the past year and play out multiple different times. And so they were just lessons that I knew that I needed to learn and to take hold of. And even though some of them were really uncomfortable, I really needed to take hold of them and to appreciate them for what they were teaching me. And so I'm going to share all of them with you here today. And I would love to hear after the fact how this resonated for you, either in the comments or you can DM me, private message me. I just love to hear from all of you. And even if it's something that maybe, you're going through too, it's nice to hear that from people that I do these live videos for, because it's not that you have to learn everything new from every live video that you attend or every podcast that you listen to. It's that also that sense of community of being like, oh, I'm going through this too. I've done this too. I've recognized this as well. I think one of the most powerful things we can do for each other is to be with each other in the lessons that we learn together. So the first thing that I learned over and over this past year is that full-time entrepreneurship is extremely intense. And it feels like so much is riding on your ability and your ability only, on your capacity and your capacity only. And even though I had been doing this for over a decade, I was not prepared for how this shift into full-time business ownership would change the way that I feel about my business, would change the way that I feel about myself as a person, would change the way that I look at things in my business, look at my relationships, look at my calendar, because it is so intense. And I've had multiple conversations with people who have mentioned that this first year of being an entrepreneur, their anxiety skyrocketed. I felt that too. And that's not to scare you away from being a full-time entrepreneur. That's not to scare you away from being a full-time wedding photographer, but it's just to put visibility around how things change in the way that you think about things, in your psyche, in your emotions, when you decide to be a full-time business owner. The stakes feel higher. It is something where I have more control over my schedule. I do have a little bit more time freedom in certain situations, but at the same time, it's really difficult sometimes to manage how many things are actually on my calendar, how many things I do actually have to get done. Knowing that if I don't do these things or maintain these things on my calendar, my business could very easily see a dip in whatever I'm working towards. The second thing is that this is like an interpersonal thing. And one thing too that I will tell you with this list is that they're not in any particular order. It's just, these are the things that were coming through in my mind as to the things that I've learned over the past year. The second thing is that you can literally be the best person in the entire world. You can be incredibly generous, kind, selfless. You can be always looking for the best in other people, and other people will still think the worst of you. And that's theirs to own. That is their mess. But it's really difficult as a business owner in an industry that is incredibly competitive. For what reason, I don't know why, but the wedding industry is incredibly competitive, especially among photographers. And you can do everything that you possibly can to the best of your ability to be a good part of the industry, and people will still find fault with you, whether that's with your work or your personality or what you're working on. And they will make you the topic of discussion in groups. They will make you the topic of discussion amongst peers. And it will always get back to you. That kind of stuff always gets back to you. And it can really impact the way that you think about yourself, because you're like, I've tried everything that I possibly could to be a good person in this situation, and it's still not being recognized. People are still choosing to see me in a negative light and to make me the topic of conversation. And it hurts. It sucks. It's not enjoyable. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that you can do to control other people's reactions to you. There's nothing you can do to control other people's conversations about you. All you can do is just continue to move forward in your integrity and allow them to do what they do, because that kind of toxic behavior always leads to a disintegration of whatever group that is occurring in. And people are not stupid. And so if people are in a situation or a group or a friendship or a relationship or a colleagueship where people in that group make it their priority to speak poorly about other people, including you, the people in that group will eventually see and understand that if this person is going to be speaking so poorly about me or about other people to me, what are they going to be saying about me to other people when I'm not in the room, right? So eventually that always comes around, but it is hard to manage, especially the first time you hear the fact that somebody chooses to make you the topic of conversation, even though you feel like you haven't even done anything to warrant it or anything of that nature. Number 3, I think that investing in support is never a bad thing. And I don't mean support by way of hiring like a VA or a studio manager. I have a studio manager, but I mean support in your actual entrepreneurial journey. So this can look like therapy. This can look like coaching. This can look like being parts of groups and masterminds. And choosing to invest in those things is never a bad idea. Even if you don't get the outcome that you desired, you always get what you need from whatever situation you're in. And there have been times that I've invested in situations and people and programs, and I haven't gotten exactly what I thought I was going to get, but I got exactly what I needed from that experience. And I found that over the past year, because things were such a significant change in my life, because being a full-time entrepreneur is very, very, very emotional and learning how to manage your emotions is a big thing in entrepreneurship. I don't think I would have gotten through this past year feeling okay if I hadn't invested in coaching, if I hadn't invested in therapy. It would have been very difficult for me to maintain those things on my own, right? For me to maintain my emotions on my own and process my emotions on my own. The 4th thing that I learned was that good friends are very difficult to find and keep. And I think that's the case with adult friendships in general, that it's hard to make friends as you get older. It's hard to especially make good friends as you get older, people who can have that longevity with you. But I've also found that, like, in general, there are going to be relationships that are in your life that you thought would be there forever. But when you become a full-time entrepreneur, things are going to change because your perspective changes, your priorities change. And that doesn't mean that like you're ditching people along the wayside for the benefit of your business, but it does mean that things change. And because things change, priorities change, the way that you think changes, there are going to be friends that don't understand that, whether or not they can articulate that. And they will just kind of see themselves out. and they won't be the cheerleaders that you anticipated them to be. They won't be the people that can walk alongside you or listen to what you have to say without, inserting their 2 cents, right? And so you will lose people. Your circle, as you become more successful, a lot of the time the circle that you built from when you were young gets smaller. And then it's up to you to seek out new relationships, new friendships that are more along the line of what you need as a full-time, successful business owner. And that doesn't mean that the people who used to be with you were bad. It doesn't mean that. But it just means that things have changed and you can honor both your changes and the capacity that these relationships used to have that they no longer have for you in the current season that you're in. Doesn't mean that either of you are bad. It just means that capacity has changed, perspective has changed, ideas have changed, and because of that, the relationship changes. That's not the end of the world. The fifth thing that I've learned, which is a more tactical thing, is that when we're scheduling our working time, we have the freedom and the flexibility to schedule our working time in the way that makes us feel best. And I highly recommend figuring out what feels best for you in a working week. And it's going to take you time. It's going to take experimentation. It's going to take like testing and trying things out to see what works best for you for your schedule. But just because you came from a 9 to 5 background doesn't mean that you have to maintain 9 to 5 hours to still be productive. What I have found is that your productivity will always respond positively to how you actually feel as a human being in the moment that you're actually working, right? So if you're somebody who's not a morning person, maybe you should plan to take slow mornings, right? If you're somebody who really doesn't like jumping right into the work week, why don't you consider keeping Mondays as a day for your like behind the scenes type stuff? That's what I chose to do. I've chosen to, I am a morning person, but I like to have slow mornings. So I really, don't start working right at 8 o'clock. Sometimes it will be 8, but a lot of the time it's like 9, 10, because I've prioritized mornings as a time to take care of myself. I also don't do video calls on Mondays. And that's because I don't like jumping right into the work week, feeling like I need to be on, right? And that also creates a buffer for me as a wedding photographer, where if I have a couple of weddings over the weekend, I already know that I'm not going to have anything that I have to do on a Monday. So if I need to take that day off to rest and recharge after a weekend of weddings, that's already available on my calendar. So figure out what works best for you and how you work and tailor your working hours to that. The sixth thing that I learned is that you determine the level and the amount of mind clutter that you allow into your life. Something that I really learned over the past year is how easy it is to have outside sources create just a ton of clutter and confusion in your mind and what you think you need to do moving forward. For me, this can be as little as making sure that when I'm working, in order for me to prioritize what I'm working on, I can't have TV shows playing in the background. I can't have podcasts playing in the background. I can't have music playing in the background. In order for me to focus on what I need to focus on and to ensure my highest amount of productivity in that moment, I can't be distracted by any noise around me. And something about me is that noise has always been an activator for me, even since I was very little. But not until recently have I understood that like that's something that I can honor and I can choose how much noise I allow into my life. And there's a piece of this too where we have so much opportunity to allow clutter and noise into our lives in general, whether you're here on social media, whether it's, being on like different podcasts, whether it's, spending a lot of time on TikTok. And what I've seen from the things that I've allowed into my life is that most of the time these outside media sources aren't actually adding to what I want them to add to. They're actually detracting and causing a sense of anxiety for me. So I like true crime podcasts, but I won't listen to them very often anymore because they activate my nervous system and they make me anxious. I don't spend a lot of time on TikTok because, and it's not in a way that's like, oh, well, I'm not doing this because it's just another new thing for wedding photographers to do. I actually don't spend a lot of time on it because I find that the culture on TikTok is very negative and very complaining. And whenever I watch a decent amount of TikTok videos, I feel incredibly anxious and depressed after the fact. I don't listen to business podcasts. If I listen to a podcast, it's usually like an educational one telling me about like different things that are going on in the world, and they're very story based. But I don't listen to business podcasts because when I listen to business podcasts, it makes me feel like I'm not doing something right and that I have to fix something when literally everything is fine, right? And I think that this idea around like the clutter and the noise is when you're allowing clutter and noise into your life, what is the point? What is the purpose? If not just to entertain, what do you feel after the fact, after you've consumed something? How do you feel, right? If you notice that after listening or watching or doing something, you feel anxious, activated, nervous, depressed, sad, down, that's a big notifier for you from your body to let you know that this is probably not a healthy thing for you to engage in. It doesn't mean that those things are necessarily bad. They're just not super healthy for you. So you have to be mindful about what you consume and when you consume and why, right? Like what's the real reason why? And I think in the culture that we're in, we're always looking for the next thing, right? Like especially as entrepreneurs, we're always looking for the next thing. We always want the next thing. We always want to know like what we could be doing like better or differently or more instead of just allowing ourselves to remain consistent and trusting that our consistency is actually going to be the thing that brings us to doing, achieving, getting more, right? The seventh thing that I've learned is that this is hard as a female business owner, but I've learned that I'm able to say what I mean and to mean what I say. And I don't believe in the concept of brutal honesty. I don't believe in the concept of being like extremely blunt because I feel like a lot of the time when people use verbiage like that, what they're actually calling into and what they're actually saying is that when they put this caveat around it of like, brutal honesty, they actually mean that they expect you to give them permission to just say whatever they want with no consequences. And that is just unkind and it just doesn't need to happen, right? We can have kind honesty, right? But I think for us as female business owners, I know for me as a female business owner, it's been hard for me to be direct in certain situations where I have known that a situation is not going to go the way that people anticipate it going. But because I'm afraid of being direct, because to me that feels brutal, right? I haven't said what I needed to say or I beat around the bush. And that actually is detrimental to every party involved, right? It is a waste of time when we are not direct with what we need to say, and we can still be direct and kind. We can be honest and kind. And there have been times where I've even had to do this with clients on wedding days or with other vendors on wedding days where something will be suggested and I'll just have to say that I totally understand where you're coming from, but I am not seeing what you're seeing. Or I totally understand where you're coming from, but here are the other things that we need to consider as well, right? And it's important, especially on wedding days, that we are direct because wedding days go so quickly. And sometimes we're on a very like I don't know, all up in the timeline. You know what I mean? It's like when you have a timeline situation, it becomes very condensed, right? So that means that time is of the essence. And when we beat around the bush and when we hem and haw, then we're not able to be direct and we don't feel comfortable being direct. And if we don't feel comfortable being direct, then we can actually waste more time than we have, right? So I've recognized that beating around the bush, not being honest, not being direct is something that is just a giant waste of time for everybody. It's a giant waste of time for me, and it's a giant waste of time for the people around me. The eighth lesson that I learned, so we're getting towards the end, is that it's my responsibility to manage my mental health, right? This means that I don't treat Instagram as my mental health outlet. This means that I am mindful about what I share on social media and on my website. Something that a mentor shared with me years ago is that you want to share your scars and not your wounds, right? Like you want to share the things that have healed, that feel good and of integrity to share, but you don't want to share the things that are still actively hurting you. And that's part of the mental health journey. I think a lot of the time, a lot of us use social media, our business social media, as a mental health outlet. And I think in some situations that is okay, but in other situations, we really should be caring for ourselves better and differently, right? Because social media is not built to positively impact your mental health. It was not built for that purpose. When we use things as outlets that were not built for the purpose of what we're trying to outlet, it's not going to work. So it might feel good to get it off our chest, but also that's why we have journals. That's why we have friends, right? And again, you can share whatever you feel comfortable sharing on social media, but you also have to know that what you do share, especially in the realm of what you desire for your mental health, is going to be something that when you're sharing it, you should also be aware of what's the outcome that you desire from this. Is this something that you're sharing for the benefit of your clients? Or is this something that you're sharing just because it's something that you're going through and you need somebody to listen? If that's the case, then you should probably, the latter is the case, you're probably going to be wanting to invest in other relationships, other friendships, and in therapy in order to prioritize and take care of your mental health in the best way possible. It's our responsibility to manage our mental health. It's nobody else's responsibility. Nobody else is in our body. Nobody else is in our mind. But I think we all know what positively impacts our mental health, whether that's things like therapy and medication, or it's things like working out, spending time outside, spending time away from the computer. Something that I've noticed is that I can really realistically only do 3 video chats a day, no matter what, because otherwise I'm extremely exhausted and that impacts my mental health. But that means that I have to be proactive with my calendar in that situation and make sure that more than 3 things that require me to be on Zoom are not going to end up on my calendar at any particular day, right? And then the last thing that I learned, and I continue to learn, and I think this is something that a lot of us entrepreneurs struggle with, whether we're wedding photographers or not. But I think especially like female entrepreneurs, this lesson of being kind and generous and compassionate with yourself, where we really need to take hold of how important it is for us to be as kind and generous and compassionate with ourselves as we have been with other people. So other people may have come to know us as somebody who is very generous, kind, open, always willing to listen, always compassionate, always seeing the better of the situation, right? But are we doing those same things for us ourselves? If we make a mistake or we do something that we wish we hadn't done, or we look back and we're like, wow, like this was embarrassing that I did this. How do we treat ourselves in that moment? Do we just beat ourselves up? Or are we a little bit more compassionate? We say, it's okay, everybody makes a mistake. And so I think using that language that we often give and offer to other people, we also need to be mindful to give it back to ourselves as well. And that sense of self-compassion and self-acceptance and allowing ourselves to be human, because we're not superhuman. And entrepreneurship may seem glamorous, but a lot of the time it puts a magnifying glass on the things we wish we had done better. It puts a magnifying glass on the things that we're striving to make better. And when the magnifying glass is there, there's no opportunity for margin to allow ourselves that sense of self-compassion. So those are all the lessons that I've learned over the past year, and I'm still learning some of them. And I'm sure I'll have more next year. But I hope that hearing my lessons learned gives you a sense of affirmation that you're not alone in working through these things, and also gives you some visibility that if you're working towards becoming full-time in your business, these are some things that you may run into when you do become full-time. And if that does become the case, you can use the information that you've learned now to start to prepare yourself for the future when you will run up and bump up against these particular things. So if anything like super resonated, I would love to hear from you. Send me a DM, send me a private message, send me an email, and I will chat with you all soon.